Hello, my name is Ramon Perez,
And I'm Andrew Lin.
And I'm Michaela Davis.
and this is our presentation on the 2014 Hiroshima landslides. So the type of disaster that had hit Hiroshima were landslides. Now, landslides are geophysical hazards that is the movement of mass of rock, debris, or earth down a slope. Now, there are multitudes of varieties from landslides, ranging from a soil creep, which can move at 1 to 10 millimeters in a year, to a debris flow, which can reach to speeds that go beyond 32 kilometers per hour or 20 miles per hour. So the specific type of landslides that had hit Hiroshima were debris flows. Uh, Generally, landslides are geophysical disasters. However, in this case, this disaster counts as both a geophysical one and a climate-related disaster. Now, the reason that it counts as a climate-related disaster as well is because of the heavy rainfall that had hit Hiroshima the night before, which was caused by a linear rain band. Now, Hiroshima is located in Japan, more specifically in the southern part of Japan, and the landslides had taken place in the Hiroshima prefecture. Now, Hiroshima is not unfamiliar with natural disasters, and since Hiroshima is in Japan, the residents experience more disasters than normal. However, specifically, Hiroshima has had a long history of natural disaster landslides. Now, exactly what happened? In the summer of August 19, 2014, Hiroshima was hit by a huge storm where, in the middle of the night, water was flooding the houses, essentially flash flooding. The residents were surprised by the amount of rain, even though they have a rain season, but it was more than they had thought or expected. Now, the rain had caused the soil and the earth on the slopes to end up being looser, which had then caused the landslides. So in the early mornings around 4 a.m., Hiroshima City was actually hit by a numerous amount of debris flows that had fell down the slope into the Hiroshima prefecture. The landslides had trapped the residents in their households, both injuring them, and some residents were even killed.
So, for the tectonic setting of Hiroshima, the tectonic plate that Hiroshima is sitting on is the Eurasian plate. It's also close to the other plates that Japan sits on, which is the North American plate, the Philippine plate, and the Pacific plate. So, this region in general experiences a lot of tectonic activity. And tectonic plates can impact landslides by shifting material around. So anytime there is a sudden movement along the plates, it can potentially trigger a landslide event, or it might just shift material around, which makes the area more vulnerable to other landslide events. And the trigger for the specific 2014 Hiroshima landslide event was caused by a heavy rainfall event where it rained a lot in a short amount of time. To be exact, a total of about 240 millimeters of rain fell onto the city within 24 hours, which is equivalent to a month's worth of rain. And this happened in multiple areas in Hiroshima. And this rainfall event caused many flash floods and landslides to occur in the area. And the debris flows that happened were powerful enough to damage infrastructure in the city, like roads, houses, and other structures. And this in turn caused a lot of injuries and deaths. And with many rescue efforts focusing on finding people missing under the debris. And the things contributing to this landslide event was that the city had many fragile slopes around it, which were mostly filled with fine-grained weathered granite, which is a really loose material, thus making it more vulnerable to landslides. And Hiroshima's geology of highly water retentive soil also makes it more vulnerable to landslides, as it absorbs the water from rainfall until it becomes oversaturated and then just slides off the slopes. And the high intensity rainfall is what initiated these debris flows down steep slopes in many areas of the city. The landslide event caused extensive amount of damage to many structures and injuring many. A few other factors contributing to this being a disaster was that the structures and housings that were built upon previous debris flow deposits. So landslides were a frequent occurrence that have affected community before. Due to the fact where they are located, they are more vulnerable to landslides. This is also because of Hiroshima's slope-filled geology with many structures that are built on the hillsides, which also contribute to its vulnerability to landslides. And landslides in general have become more frequent in the past decade, with 1,200 landslides a year compared to the previous 770 landslides a year from the previous decade. And damage from landslides have increased from the past decade due to the increase in rainfall, which could be a result of the entire climate change situation around the globe.
Moving on to the statistics and the facts of the disaster. The 2014 Hiroshima landslide killed 74 people, which is 44 more than the deaths counted in the previous landslide disaster in 1999. Out of those 74 people, 50 residents were killed by the debris flow torrent. Most of the deaths from the disaster were people who lived in wooden houses near the debris flow's exit, as the composition of their houses, along with the location of the exit, made it very vulnerable for destruction. Other than those casualties, there were 166 slope failures triggered by the pre-landslide rainfall, 44 people injured, 133 houses destroyed, and 296 houses severely damaged. As a result of these effects, the equivalent of 8.5 million US dollars was needed in order to fund Hiroshima's recovery and the recovery of its citizens and their infrastructure. And now for the significant impact that the event had on history. After the 2014 landslide in Hiroshima, Japanese scientists began to realize that long-term changes to land and repeated usage of hill slopes for residential development actually affects the vulnerability of the communities near those landslide-prone areas. After a very similar landslide disaster in 1999, which was 15 years prior to this one, Japan adopted the Landslide Disaster Reduction Law, which made prefectures and cities outline which areas qualified as landslide potential risk zones, so that citizens could then view the public information and decide where they want to live based on that info. This law is often referred to as the Sediment Disaster Countermeasures for Sediment Disaster Prone Areas Act. Despite the law being put into effect after the 1999 landslide in Hiroshima, people continue to lose their lives to debris flow sediment disasters in the years following this law's implementation. In fact, the loss of life that occurred as a result of the 2014 Hiroshima landslide was almost 3 times that of the one in 1999. The 2014 disaster ended up persuading the National Diet of Japan to approve new revisions of the reduction law in order to ensure the safety of Japanese citizens in the future. So although the 2014 Hiroshima landslide was a horrible catastrophe and disaster, at least a little bit of good came out of it. Although there were numerous deaths and casualties, along with the loss of infrastructure and homes, the 2014 landslide paved the way for new developments in public safety in Japan. Thank you for listening to our presentation.